Ja, schönen guten Tag allerseits. Herzlich willkommen nun zur zweiten Runde unserer Ringvorlesung dieses Jahr. Vor 2 Wochen hatten wir ja einen Gast aus England und wir haben die Vorlesung ja so gestaltet, dass wir sie einerseits hier im echten Leben anbieten und ich freue mich, dass Sie so zahlreich erschienen sind, und andererseits möchte ich auch die Gäste, die Sie online zuschalten, auch recht herzlich begrüßen. Und wir haben heute in der zweiten Veranstaltung ein sehr interessantes Thema. Wir haben einen Gast aus Norwegen, per Aarvik. Ich werde jetzt dann gleich ihn vorstellen und dann direkt auf Englisch ihn einführen. Der Vortrag wird auf Englisch sein und er hat ein sehr interessantes Thema mitgebracht, nämlich er wird über Crowdsourcing und die Möglichkeiten des Crowdsourcing sprechen. Und wir werden danach die Zeit haben, auch gemeinsam zu diskutieren. Wir haben auch für diejenigen, die online da sind, die Möglichkeit, über das Chatfenster entsprechende Fragen zu stellen. Und wir freuen uns auf eine interessante Diskussion zu den entsprechenden Themen. So, but now I switch to English and I'll try to introduce you. Per Aarvik, you are, oh, I don't want to make a presentation. So, you are with a standby task force, which is part of the Digital Humanitarian Network, which is an initiative which tries to use crowdsourcing and crowdsourcing information in order to support digital humanitarian operations and help first responders and international agencies to deal with large-scale events. So you are with the Standby Task Force since a couple of years, since 2010 and 12, and you are now Vice President of this organization. But before that, you have a very interesting background because you worked in a variety of different fields. You worked in the field of relief work, but you also did work in journalism, photography, and advertising. I think these are all relevant areas and also relevant to relief work. And you have a master degree in comparative politics. You did that while you worked at Bergen University with a what does it say? Department of Design, which is very interesting, and we talked about these issues before, and actually there's a close link between design issues, how to design computer-aided interfaces and so on, which is linked to collaborative decision-making. And therefore, I'm really looking forward to your presentation. And you actually worked on your master thesis on crowdsourced election monitoring in Kenya. I think this was at the early times of crowdsourcing when you are in areas where you don't have access to information and you use this crowdsourced technology to actually monitor whether an election works right or wrong and how people, whether there's election fraud or things like that. So with that, I would like to give the floor to you, and the title of your presentation is up here, and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, good evening. Thank you for your warm welcome and nice presentation. It's a pleasure to be here with you and discuss things that are connected to this digital world we live in. I'm going to talk a little bit, touch into a bit philosophical aspects of what I think is important to have in the back of our minds when we deal with almost anything online. I'm going to talk a bit about Standby Task Force and how we work, and point to some experiments and new stuff going on. And finally, discuss a bit on the phenomenon of these large online campaigns, etc., because we are surrounded by a lot of skepticism, whether these things work, whether, etc. We'll see how it ends. My connection with this area started on the second day of Christmas in 2004, when the large earthquake generated a tsunami that hit Thailand and these islands. Point to mention it has to do with motivation, because when you sit in your sofa and watch TV, you feel helpless and you feel you can't do anything, and you see the events unfold. So when my family went to bed, I went online and discovered suddenly that there was the opposite of helplessness. There was a huge crowd of very active people trying to engage with the crisis. And one of these groups were these guys based in Thailand, who set up this online forum. The local governments, at least the Norwegian ones, were totally paralyzed by the massive volume of this disaster. They had procedures that prevented them from releasing lists of missed persons or suspected victims of the disaster. All these phenomena led to the civil society kind of taking the problem in their own hands. So what happened on this forum was that it was a straightforward, very simple technology forum. What happened was that the crowd were sourcing newspapers in their home countries for images and details about missed persons. In Thailand, the crisis was so massive that very strong previous rules about protection of individuals were totally removed. So hospitals would publish lists of their patients, which is really unheard of. You don't do that. But they did it here. So the community then tried to combine the images from the missed persons, from newspapers, from TV, from everywhere, with the lists of people found alive or not alive. Today, Facebook is doing this. So when the terrorist attack in Paris happened some weeks ago, I was notified that a friend in the affected area, and he didn't report himself yet. He did eventually, but what once was a crowdsourced experiment 10 years ago is now picked up by mainstream technology companies and tried to be embedded. Google also has this person finder tool. I love this man because he's an old man, and he talks very interestingly about what it is that is about to happen. He says that this connected space, this internet, is trying to suck up all the information it possibly can get hold of. This machine, that he calls it, has been running for such a long time. It is the longest running, continuously running machine that man has ever made. And all our gadgets, all our screens are the eyes and the windows into this machine. So he really becomes philosophical towards the end of this TED video and says, let the one read it. He calls this machine the one, the big one. The one is us, because it's our data that are in this machine. And we are, and will even be more, totally dependent of this machine and everything which is in it. At this point, when I show this movie to the students, they were freaked out, because this sounds very terrifying. But he also reminds us that there are other technologies that have been introduced through history that we have become totally dependent of, like the technology of writing, shaping thoughts into symbols on a piece of paper, or the printing, or printing press, and the multiplication of the written word that made some villager in Norway able to sit in his barn and read Greek philosophy. That wasn't possible before the book. So anyway, this is a backdrop of what we are seeing emerging. Is this familiar in Germany? Then you have to look it up, because this one is not live. If you type earth at .nullschool.net, it will appear, and it's a project originally by a student in Massachusetts, MIT, as far as I remember, that shows 3 hours old meteorological data from all over the world in beautiful animated real time. I can upload it afterwards. Ships traffic are streamed online. All the ships with these responders send their blip to base stations, and you can pick it up and see the destination of the ship, the name of the ship, the cargo, etc., etc. Except someone who's hiding themselves around the Horn of Africa. They turn off the transponder. We can move into a simulated image of the cockpit of any of these flights, and we can sit there and watch it land in any airport in the world. The web cameras posted all over makes us able to some kind of be present at distant locations. During the uprising in Egypt in 2011, it was said that the presence of the world was present at Tahrir Square because they had a camera on Al Jazeera, mounted a camera on one of these buildings and was streaming high-definition live video from the square. In my home, we did an experiment putting the laptop at the dinner table, turning this thing on, and just feel the presence of this world event, you know, while eating dinner in a small house far away. I tried an experiment with my students when I still was teaching the design class. I had a friend, he was a theater instructor, and this is his workshop with my students, where he is in a hotel room in Kiev, in Ukraine. And after the session, we discussed whether he was present in the room or not, or whether the sheer size of his image had an effect on what he was saying. From where I was standing, it certainly looked as he, at least if he wasn't physically present, he certainly had the power to move these people around at his fingertips, even if he was thousands of kilometers away. And now language barriers starts to break down. For every round with new events, the machine learning systems becomes more and more clever. So this is, on the left-hand side, the normal view, and on the right-hand side is the Google translation which may be ridiculous, but it increases my understanding of the text on the left-hand side up to maybe a level of 70% correct, but it is 10 times better than understanding nothing. So when this Facebook page appears only a couple of weeks ago, it is, when we translate it, machine learning, that we understand that this is somebody who is offering us transport to Norway via Moscow, and with the hopes of asylum in Norway and the possibility of visa to America. So this is what happens on one side of our contemporary reality, and we slowly move over to discuss crowdsourcing. And we just have to remind ourselves that crowdsourcing is not new. And before they did the daring thing to have civilians report on incidents, some 100 years back, there were watchtowers and employed people who were watching the city to see if there were fires, or there were people walking in the streets to see if there were robberies. But slowly, crowdsourcing methodologies were used to collect information from the citizens. And one of the preacher men behind this is Clay Shirky, who talks about the enormous surplus of cognition in the world, where our ability to use spare time to produce value is abundant. As far as I remember from his talk, he says that if you combine all the hours it takes to write Wikipedia, that is about the amount of time the American population spend watching TV in a weekend. So there is still a lot of potential to harvest. So there are two sides of this crowdsourcing things. One is the phenomenon, which I find important, is to be real-time connected with a large group of people. In a large group of people, you are more likely to find precisely the competence you are looking for than in a small group of people. So if you are in your emergency room and you are 10 people there, if you are connected to other emergency rooms and can pose your questions or demands to other expertise, you are far better off. So the connectedness as such in crisis situations gives you a far greater space for action. So that is one aspect of the connectedness. The other aspect is that if you need something to be done, and I'm sure all kinds of businesses have cumbersome, tiresome work, finding information, locating information, sorting information, analyzing them. In a crowd, you have far more hands on deck to do it. So all these people online have all kinds of motivations for joining these kind of things. We're getting a bit back to that, but that is not really important. So the government starts to discover this as well. Maybe one of the important ones, Katrina was in New Orleans, was of course very important in the sense that FEMA, the American agency, discovered how they discovered their problems of handling such a massive situation. So during Hurricane Sandy, one of many examples is that they launched this aircraft that flew along the beaches of around north and south of New York, taking pictures like this, publishing online, and asking the crowd to classify the damage visible in the image, light, moderate, or heavy, so anybody could do this, and finally generated rough damage assessment maps for evaluating where to go first. As one of the first examples I know of where an official organization does the daring experiment of posting 55,000 images online for anybody to click at. Because you could imagine that in some of these images, there was something that should have been shielded for the public view, or I don't know what. In this online world, we think that everything is already there, which is not true. This is the map of Gaza City on Google Maps. This is to understand that Google is not a kind uncle or a nice grandfather. Google is a commercial company. Google provide their mapping service in areas where you and I live, where there's money to find, and many places of the world that is not the case. So volunteers, this is Wikimapia, and this is OpenStreetMap, do the job where Google doesn't. This is also what they have been doing, OpenStreetMap, during crisis. They have quite large base of online volunteers that simply draw maps of satellite images during or before disasters, and have been active and very used in many crises. This is during the Ebola epidemic, where obviously for MSF or any medical team to have maps to know exactly where the village is, where the patient tells he comes from, so they can do contact tracing and discuss where this disease has spread. Where maps, if they don't exist, they are, well, maps plays an extremely important role. You all know that. One problem with these large events, when a lot of new volunteers are attracted to groups like OpenStreetMap, is of course their lack of routine and lack of experience. And some of them are of course lightweight in their self quality check. So during these events, there is a massive work, to qualify the information, the roads drawn or the buildings that has been entered to the maps. And with 1 million objects drawn on a map per day after the Nepal earthquake, it's a massive task to check the quality. This is the interface they use for drawing what is needed to draw. And if you go to OpenStreetMap, you find the task manager and you find straightforward instruction on how it works. So you understand it in 2 minutes and can start gaining experience. Maps, this is not Kibera, this is Matara in Nairobi, Kenya. Kibera was for a long time appearing as a green spot on official Kenyan maps, because it's a squatter town, a shanty town. It is not publicly recognized as streets or houses or stuff because they shouldn't be there. These various social activist groups started projects where the inhabitants of these areas started mapping the area, showing where people lived, showing the difficult spots, collecting information on their local geography. And through these projects, turned out that, together with other parameters in place, turned out that suddenly they became more conscious on their surroundings. They became more conscious about their role as citizens, as participants in society, simply by suddenly come to existence on a map. And these are maps drawn by walking around and plotting positions on a piece of paper. So maps has an enormous impact on identity connected to location. In the 2007-2008 violent aftermath of the elections in Kenya, Ori Okolo, she is a local activist and blogger, was so overwhelmed by incidents happening on the ground, on the map in Kenya, that she never managed to keep up with the flow of information. So she hired or engaged with local skilled people in Nairobi to create the first instance of Ushahidi. And this is where thousands of events, that is humans interacting with each other, or nature interacting with humans, crushing them or whatever, events have been populating these maps since 2008. The 2010 earthquake in Haiti is well known as a huge mapping experience, thanks to this guy, Patrick Meyer, and his recent book, Digital Humanitarians, tells the full story from his point of view on how this has been going on. But this is how crowdsourced mapping started with, I think these are mostly students. I think they are in somebody's flat, and it looks like they're eating junk food, but it looks like they have a very intense time and a very good time. And they do stuff together, and they do stuff that is perceived as important. And they are breaking new frontiers in what you do. So it's a good thing. So the process, the workflow on mapping the Haitian earthquake is also a brilliant example of what I mentioned earlier, the ability to connect with expertise that you need. So they managed to get hold of the mobile company, they managed to get hold of the local radio station guy. All these different parameters worked together and together shaped what came to be the environment of the crisis mapping of Haiti, which was not only a map on the web, because that map on the web would have been stone dead if nobody used it. It would have been totally dead if nobody was feeding it. It would have been totally dead if those using it were not able to respond to what was communicated through this loop of communication. So there are always a lot of parameters that has to be in place. If they are not in place, we might as well sit down and watch TV, you know, if this loop of communication doesn't work all the way around. You've seen this? Yes, thank you, Craig Fugate. From this event, expanded a network, and they named themselves Crisis Mappers. And as I mentioned, there are thousands of Ushahidi maps drawn since 2008. They are just launching their version 3.0, which is relatively advanced software for anybody to use. The last network to be shaped is the digital humanitarian network, where organizations, both volunteer and professional bodies, are constitute the membership of this network. And what we hope in the future is that the digital humanitarian network can become a player, central player in large man-made or natural disasters as a contact hub. So typically a request for assistance goes to DHN. DHN then asks us, the members, organizations, can any of you take this request, take it on? And sometimes we say yes, and sometimes we say sorry. We don't have the capacity, the skills, or the time, or whatever. And what is also interesting in these kind of networks is how very different characters and very different cultures meet. So this is geeks without bounds having a conversation with us, with statisticians without borders, I think, representatives. So it's a very fruitful and dynamic environment to play with, because everybody is there, which means they are open to other points of view and new ideas. Standby Task Force is we have members in more than 100 countries, so we have a potential resource of individuals that is quite amazing. Whether all of these individuals will react if called is a totally different question. But this is how it looks, the membership figures. When something happens, the first thing we start is to start our collector. This is just a video. It is real-time speed and shows the stream of Twitter messages under these two single hashtags on the evening of, it was in November, Friday evening, late at night. So this is filmed with my mobile camera. The flow of information is so large that no human eye can follow it, and no human eye can disseminate it and understand it, you know. And in between all these messages are important messages, like these ones from Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines in 2013. So we are working together with Qatar Computing Research Institute in Qatar, obviously, who have developed a machine learning platform that harvests these tweets And as we train the platform to distinguish between relevant tweets and irrelevant tweets, it becomes better and better to sort out the noise and leave us with the tweets that has meaning and has relevance for what we are collecting information about. And during Haiyan was the first time we used it. And typically at typhoon, you are prepared because it's forecasted. Now it's going to hit shore. And it's only when it hits land that the greatest damage happens. This gives you time to train your artificial intelligence reader and time to prepare. Not so during an earthquake where it happens suddenly, and the first one in Standby Task Force to react to it then launches this Twitter reader. These are some statistics from the Haiyan exercise, where the first 48 hours, what was distinguished from 230,000 tweets was 3,800 messages with a content that had some useful meaning connected to the disaster. And for the images, we ended with 600 images of damage. So this is how it looks like when these massive amounts of tweets are coming in, and the volunteers then geolocate the tweets according to the location mentioned in the tweet. So for example, a tweet containing the message, "all the houses are gone," is not meaningful because it hasn't any location in it, you know, depending on the crisis. But in this case, yeah. So the Haiyan maps ended up like these ones. And the point with them is that they are very early stage visualizations of the extent or indicators of damage in the area. During the Ebola outbreak, the Standby Task Force was in the beginning engaged for mapping cell towers, mapping infrastructure elements. Eventually, we logged ordinary health facilities in the countries out of the thought that if this crisis expands to ever new areas, maybe it is useful to know if there is a hospital or if there is a clinic on forehand in this area. And it turned out that there was hardly any public registry of these things. So during those 2-3 months, we collected information from very, very many different sources, from UN on the ground, old data sets from World Health Organization, very many different, almost handwritten lists coming scanned and sent via mail from Sierra Leone, until we had a rough, no, not rough, relatively precise actually, registry of about 5,000 clinics in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. Later on, we heard that we got an email saying that our records were included in the project of creating the official registry for Guinea right now. During the Ebola was also something very peculiar happening, is that through Skype groups. This was the first time I saw that many different organizations being in the same room, being able to talk to each other. So all the UN organizations were there, all the major players within health in the States, British Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, military and civil organizations together in a big room, together with representatives for the online volunteer community, which means that information or information about where to find information flew very easily between all these parties. So this is just a representation on the number of posts in one of the maybe 15, 20 Skype chats that was connected to this crisis. And the very high peak there is the number of messages on the day that the first instance of Ebola was noted in Mali, in Kai. Was a child who had died in Kais. The earthquake happens without warning. So we had 3 hours after the quake, we had this Twitter machine running. So the information collected from the tweets relatively quickly becomes contaminated by supporting messages like pray for Nepal, or which is nice, but not very useful. So typically the tweet collection is 24, 48 hours after a disaster. After that, there are other methods that are far more effective on collecting information from disaster. So when Kathmandu Living Labs got their platform launched 24 hours after the quake, we fed our information into their Ushahidi map and collaborated with them later on. Again, there were Skype was used as a communication platform, and during this situation, the parallel conversations were maybe 20, 30 different ones. Also, what was very different from, say, Ebola was that we had close connection with civil society groups on the ground, like these guys on some street in Kathmandu, doing registering incidents on the Kathmandu Living Labs quake map. So during the Nepal aftermath, after the Nepal earthquake, I think we saw an emerging, not trend, that is too strong a word, but interesting phenomenon in how civil society groups on the ground interacted with online volunteers and managed to even respond to needs on the ground. Whereas the formal responders also, of course, were present, but maybe also met some challenging situations. Flying in the airport soon became overcrowded with material, with airplanes, things like that. So the online groups kind of were bypassing all these things and using local resources. This is an attempt of describing what happened. That if you have the affected people on the bottom left there, they are connected to some kind of Facebook groups. where they talk to their family and friends. Maybe they have a daughter in the United States, so they are online to their closed family or friends community. Some of the individuals in this community had connection with the volunteer and technical communities. It could be us, it could be some other organization engaged in the Nepal crisis. And these volunteers were picking up news, picking up events from their Facebook groups and communicated further in the loop. Where Kathmandu Living Labs in the middle became some sort of civil society group's hub, where the information came back down on the ground and could be distributed to local NGOs and local groups assisting. During the refugee situation we have in Europe now, it seems also that Facebook has taken a very important role as a tool for all the hundreds of local communities working with these things. A project we did in September was harvesting information from all kinds of these social media groups, feeding it via the organization Internews, who used it as a planning tool for their organizations on the ground, operating from Lesvos in Greece and up the Balkan routes, to be able to plan where the needs for humanitarian assistance was. So the old models of networks describing some unorganized, some semi-organized, or some closed networks, and putting them in boxes like this, I think is less and less valid, because what actually happens is that you see a merging between formal networks and informal groups collaborating. Maybe that is if the crisis is serious enough. If it is a normal flooding that the authorities are capable of handling, I don't think the civil society will be let inside these formal structures. If it is Hurricane Sandy and the New York city struggles handling the situation, then the informal groups are invited in. But anyway, these kind of squaring up and separating the landscape is extremely difficult. It is also a problematic aspect that when a lot of new people enter these areas, they don't have any training as you guys, as you need physical training in physical response, you also need training in virtual response. One of the things is codes of conduct in these online fora. The latest discussion in the digital humanitarian network is how do we speak to each other when this online community contains both activists and should there be an agreement negotiated in these spaces on how to one thing is how to speak, another is how to reference to what is said or typed in these landscapes. So there is still a lot of thinking to be done to handle all these aspects. Standby Task Force have their activation criteria developed over many years and developed out of the experience on where is it we can really do something and where is it that we quickly enter into obstacles that are very difficult to handle with the kind of network that we represent. The phenomenon of connecting with organizations on the ground is always the preferred situation, but not always the possible situation. So sometimes it has happened that we've done monitoring, media monitoring situations, for example, where we don't have anybody on the ground in the affected area. But that is the rule, that if we have somebody on the ground, we can play a much better role. And the spectrum of sources we use are far wider, really, than Twitter and Facebook and social media, because what develops is a skill set on where to find, for example, baseline data, demographic data, all these kind of things that are useful in planning of large-scale operations. The landscape of the tools used by us is totally continuously moving forward. And what we used, I've been talking about Skype. Now we are moving slowly towards Slack. And eventually, after a couple of months, we will evaluate, was that better or worse? Maybe we go back, maybe there is another tool that is used by our organization. But eventually we have also become kind of dependent on what the rest of the sphere use to communicate. Because if we use the same, it's a greater chance that we meet each other without difficulties. If we all use different communication platforms, you have to be present in 3 different platforms, which is more cumbersome. And volunteers within the Standby Task Force, as well as within a lot of other organizations, have their skill set, can be represented in some kind of a scale, where the easiest part is simply sit in your sofa and click on something, up to more advanced understanding of what is needed. Together with the volunteers, we always engage a number of volunteers who act as coordinators, who guide the volunteers, who assist and who work on shifts, so that we possibly can cover 24/7. So one of the benefits with the Standby Task Force is that since we have members all over not all over the planet, but we have a decent part of the time zones covered, we can operate 24/7. So when the Asia shift goes off, the European takes over, and then finally the American ones. And sitting at the top of these deployments is a role where it is an extremely challenging role, because you have to relate to all kinds of different groups that are involved in the situation, and sometimes have to fight for your place in the landscape, that you actually can contribute. But the later deployments, at least that we have kind of proved a meaningful role for online volunteers. And then I think also that this role will develop and change in the future as we go along. Just as an example of the various kinds of deployments we take on, not only disasters, but we can also do preparedness mapping, which we did for ACAPS in 2012, or simply testing new tools is also in the portfolio. In 2012, Evelyn Hitchens made this her master based on a survey on motivations from the Standby Task Force members. And whether that has changed in 3 years, their reason for participating in these kind of deployments, I don't know. Your students will find out. So, despite the world is online and ever more sensors are out there, there are still white spaces on the maps. There are still a lot of mechanisms. Sometimes I say that it looks like we are replicating our physical world in cyberspace. We are drawing the maps, we are putting up the cars, our fridges, or I don't know what, smoke sensors, as a kind of replication, a digital representation of the world we live in, alive and interactive. So let's get down to the ground, because it's very easy to get caught by these big systems and these global phenomena. I live in a very, very small village on the west coast of Norway, and as all other decent villages, we also have our community fair, where somebody plays some music, and somebody do some exhibitions, and somebody sells marmalade and flowers, and somebody tells stories from old times. And what I was thinking about this time, a friend of me and mine, was there are somebody here who should have been here who are not able to be here. And that was the old people in the neighboring nursery homes. They who had grown up and walked their shoes, worn out their shoes on these streets, they were not able to come because it's so expensive to rent these specialized taxis, and you have to have nurses to follow, etc. So what we said is that if they can't come to us, how can we come to them? So simply by using off-the-shelf, very cheap gadgets and software and some cables, and aligning ourselves with the kids in the village who are perfectly capable to run a TV studio, we managed to transfer the whole event to the nursery home. So they could join us, you know. Nothing big, nothing sensational, but simply use of technology for a decent little experiment in a very, very local and low-key setting. And it certainly looked like they appreciated the experiment. And next time, of course, we would like a video wall instead of this stupid little screen. And of course, we would like a screen at the side there with a camera on the market where the grandchildren can come and talk to Granny in the nursery home from this market square. And the technology to do it is in our pockets, you know, really. So it's very important that we keep this in mind. This is not the connectedness is not only a question of very large systems. The same methodologies or technologies can be used also in very small systems and very human-oriented systems. You remember MH370 that disappeared in the Malaysia, and Tomnod. Is Tomnod a familiar thing in Germany? No? Okay. Tomnod is a volunteer network connected to a satellite company. So it is frequently used in the States, for example, on mapping damage after wildfires in California. So they lay out these satellite images and have the volunteers tag images. So Tomnod launched their project after this plane disappeared to find it, you know? And we all sat there with these screens where this is the dot that I see here. And these are my piece, you know, to go through. The ocean is relatively big, and there were many, many clicks. And there were many, many people involved. And this is the area of the ocean that was covered by the Tomnod satellite images. So the red stripes that you see on this map are the areas covered. These are the areas covered by the total amount of satellite images looking for this aircraft. The Chinese, the Americans, the French, everybody was eager to show that we found it. And nobody found it. But they found something else. The Tomnod volunteers, they found a ton of fridge doors and broken these boards and bits and pieces from boats. And suddenly the world became aware that actually, yes, there is a sea of plastic also in the Indian Ocean, where this, the most famous one, the North Pacific Gyre, the sea of plastic in the North Pacific, but these are also represented in all the other oceans. So some good came out of it. Tomnod is a tool that has some credential mechanisms in it, but the task you do using Tomnod is so massive, is so time-consuming that without some kind of stimulation to continue, it is difficult to see how they can keep up the interest. We have the same problem in Standby Task Force. So one of our team dialogue with CCP Games, who are based on Iceland, and produced this game called EVE Online, to see whether there are areas where the gaming industry and the digital humanitarian field can have common interests. As you saw previously, Facebook, during crisis, Facebook converts and does stuff, you know, to try to assist with their people finder. Google does exactly the same. They even have a separate crisis response group. And it is imaginable that the gaming industry can use their programming power or even their membership sizes in humanitarian situations. The drones are a chapter on itself, and not only in imaging natural disasters, but also in human rights situations. These tools are tested and experimented with. Artificial intelligence for monitoring elections is maybe also a challenging thing, but point is that advanced technological systems seems to be explored and tested by really a wide spectrum of groups. So the first time we used drone or UAV images in a deployment was during the Cyclone Pam this spring, where video recorded by the drones were still images from the videos recorded by the drones were tagged by the volunteers to describe the level of damage on buildings. This was a very slow process, so I don't think that's the way to go. The next test was an online. It was only a test, so we didn't have live video. We had recorded video, but the test was made as a real-time event where you can imagine the drone flying over the damaged area, streaming video to the internet, and the crowd volunteers tag the images directly as they go. So each dot here represents an individual who has been clicking on that spot saying that that building is damaged. So the outliers missed the building, but there is enough agreement on which buildings are destroyed and which ones are just not yet built. As an extremely interesting experiment on real-time damage assessment. We have talked a bit about Facebook in this session. We have to mention briefly that Facebook is not an open social medium. Ethan Zuckerman, in his book Digital Rewire, Digital Cosmopolitans, he points to he talks about an example about Facebook. In Myanmar and also in other countries, Facebook equals the internet. Facebook is so widespread, that is where people go when they go on the internet. That is where they go to see news, to read news, or to live their online life. What Ethan Zuckerman points to is that the first thing you are asked about when you create your account on Facebook is who you are. You are encouraged to tell where you went to school, who are your classmates, who are your friends, and the whole thing is clustered around your real-life social structure. Now, this, according to Zuckerman, promotes what is called homophily, where like-thinking minds are attracted to each other and enjoy sitting at the same table in the restaurant or in the cinema, which in turn, in societies where this becomes the major online kind of behavior, becomes a threat that you create these cells that doesn't really communicate with each other. But if you communicate on the internet, the chances are very high that the ones in your community agree with you. So you're not challenged. So you prepare the grounds for potential amplifying hate speech or, I don't know, joint opinions on specific issues, you know. So even if the Facebook group is nice and joyful and harmless, it is, I think, an important thing to keep in mind about how tools have political constraints in them. So they direct and promote a certain kind of behavior from their users so that we don't look upon them as totally neutral products. So, and this is just to mention as a case to keep in mind. Because we think that anyone can change the world as long as we have these powerful tools at our hand. This is Asma Mahfouz, which, by the way, is a video you should see because it belongs to the human history. And it's a very powerful video, and it sparked a very powerful and long-lasting event that had impact on a large number of people. So, and it was of course, the event that triggered the Arab Spring, where when one president after the other, there was a certain optimism and a hooray movement going around, until it turned out some years later that it wasn't as easy as that to overthrow government and install democracy. And I think the learning, no, I never use the term learning, because I think the lesson from this is before concluding on online events, to reflect on what really happened. Just as crowdsourcing is older than we think, online activism organizations are also older than we think. One of the first one I know of was the organization Witness, shaped by vocal singer Peter Gabriel in 1992. The concept of Witness is to hand out video cameras to local groups all over the world, really, who document atrocities or injustice in their local communities. These videos are then used to be bicycled to the nearest Witness organization office, who then put the video online to advocate for the local cases. Various organizations have appeared. Some of them got large attention, like the Kony 2012 campaign. Joseph Kony is the leader of the Lord's Army operating in Uganda and Central Africa, and known for atrocities on local communities. So there is an American group of 4 or 5 gentlemen working in this area with serious film skills. So they create this video, telling the story about Joseph Kony and his Lord's Resistance Army. What they didn't expect, and this video is 29 minutes long. That is very long video on YouTube. What these guys didn't expect was that this got 99 million views. And the Twitter sphere exploded on this. And suddenly their campaign was world famous. They had an organization which is called Invisible Children that operate among schools in the States, collect money, and they have certain schooling projects as well as this campaign to catch Joseph Kony and bring him to justice in the criminal court. So the 2012 campaign took off and had a phase 2 where they were going to convince politicians to react, to catch him, and they were going to wallpaper the world with these posters. So if you joined Invisible Children, you could notify them, you would get a package with posters in the mail, and you should cover your city with these posters on a particular day. Meanwhile, the video was heavily criticized for being a very simplification of the story of Joseph Kony and superficial kind of representation of the problem, criticized in media, and the covering poster campaign never took off as intended. But still, for the Kony 2012 merchandise sales of $13 million is respectable, especially when it cost only $3 million to produce those merchandises. Their crisis tracker, that is a mapping platform for mapping incidents connected to Joseph Kony and Lord's Resistance Army. If you ever get hold of this tool, you should, because it is extremely sophisticated and very, very user-friendly and usable. But it's not open source, unfortunately. But there are statistical analyze on the fly. There is the timeline, there is the map, there is the incidents, categorization, all kinds of relatively nice aspects of it. Joseph Kony is still somewhere in the woods in Uganda. And the posters are probably trashed by now. And I don't know if it was the Cameroonese army who managed to release these girls actually only yesterday, I think. There was 900 individuals released from captivity in northern Cameroon yesterday. These girls are the schoolgirls captured by Boko Haram, who generated the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. And promoters like these made this a very similar campaign to the Joseph Kony campaign. Extreme media attention all over the world and questionable outputs. But as I said, maybe these girls were released by the Cameroonese army yesterday, but this was in northern Cameroon and not in Nigeria. Maybe the enormous media focus on these things doesn't solve what they say they are going to solve. Maybe they do other things. Maybe they have other effects, like the Tomnod action looking for the airplane had the effect of finding that all oceans on the planet are polluted by plastic. Maybe that is just as an important message to find. So I'm not saying they failed, but maybe they fulfilled something else than the intention was. There are lots of these groups. Avaz is maybe the biggest and most known. Members worldwide, whereas Amnesty has 3 million online members. So there is a large group of phenomena that are born in the digital age that explode and become extremely big. And there is very few institutions or organizations born in the paper age or the physical age that manage the transition at the same level, because they have a burden of previous kinds, methodologies of doing things that are simply different. So Avaz is campaigning for human rights, etc., etc. And the trick here is you see your name appear on this rolling list when you have signed a petition. Some of us, they work a lot with consumer rights and environmental issues. Right now it is the climate, it's bees, it is trying to fight the monopoly of large corporations, like Monsanto is a declared target for these groups. And some people definitely think about these phenomena as ruining serious resistance or activism. It may be true, but we don't know that. And until somebody measures these things, quick conclusions. Of course, you don't save the world by clicking on your mobile phone, but maybe you do something else by having 3 million people at least take action that is, as Clay Shirky puts it, far more than doing nothing at all. Some of these campaigns last for a very long time. The Syria tracker is still running, and it started as during the demonstration as a mapping of events during the very early stages, and at that time also communities within the digital humanitarian network joined these mapping, but very quickly pulled out, simply because we cannot guarantee that our volunteers are able to judge post, whether it is true, false, correct or wrong. So the Standby Task Force very quickly pulled out of this and say, leave this to people who know what they are doing, like this guy who is, I actually don't know if he is still there, but has his own monitoring agency from inside Syria, reporting to various social media. In these landscapes, you will also discover that governments try to hinder these flow of communication. This is from Egypt, when internet, no, wait a minute, is it Syria? Anyway, it's either Egypt or Syria, and it shows the total internet traffic, and when it was stopped on the 27th of January 2012. During this period, it was Egypt. During this period, you have other creative souls that normally are looked upon as the bad guys, the hackers, the kids, you know. And this is no, it's not a national group, but it's a group called Telecomics, who have individual members all over. What they did when the internet in Egypt was shut down is they scanned information for all the fax machines they could find in the country. Then they created this particular letter and faxed it to all these fax machines, saying that if you manage to connect yourself, and if you find an old dial-up modem and manage to connect yourself to a telephone line, here is the username and password you can use on the receiving end with this number. 49, I think, is Finland. Germany. Okay? Phone Germany and get connected to the internet. Cool. And it worked. Suddenly, if you were working in an office in Egypt, out comes a fax from Telecomics. And then 2 hours, the boss carves it and throws it. 2 hours later, there comes a new fax. So it's a way of breaking these walls of silence that are attempted to be mounted during crisis. And the latest one is also a seaworthy video on YouTube when Anonymous declares war on Daesh. We are also better hackers. And the freedom of this net is one issue that is protected or trying to be protected by very serious players, and there are very ignorant players and that try to oppose it. By this I mean that so many aspects of phenomena now happen through the free flow of communication. So rather than preventing this communication, when every kid in the world was downloading free music, that could be used as an argument to close the communication, you know? That would also hit other aspects than downloading free music. When another kid in Sweden created Spotify, suddenly the stealing of music was dramatically reduced. And that is another way of handling a problem. Somebody steals music, let's close the gate. That is one attempt to solve it, which doesn't really work, as we saw Egypt try to shut down the internet. The other attempt is to try to create a different situation that makes the kids pay for their music, which has been the case for the music industry, more or less, in that direction. So we're waiting for the film industry, and we noticed that when the American politicians tried to propose these various acts in the Congress in the United States, the whole online community became furious, and I don't think it has happened ever, but Wikipedia went black as a protest to these legislation for 24 hours. But very importantly, Aarvik reacted and had a petition campaign where letters were sent to politicians, but they also had a telephone campaign where people were asked to phone their member of their representative in Congress and convince them that this regulation of the communication. The basic thing, as I've understood it, is that if this law went through, then the host of the information could be arrested by hosting illegal, for example, music. And then you move the control of the content down to the private players. So it is, if you rent out your apartment to somebody and this somebody turns out to be a criminal, then you are punished for renting out the apartment to him. That was the logic of the SOPA and PIPA Act. Anyway, during these 24 hours, it turned. So on January 18, there were 80 supporters for the new law. On January 19, there were 101 opponents and only 65 supporters. So a very clear-cut target for the campaign, convince the politicians not to accept this proposal, worked. And another characteristic of this is that several organizations worked together, both online, but also physical, by speaking and phoning to their representatives. So Wikipedia came back. We've talked a bit about hackers and dangerous situation. If you are interested in these subjects, you have to visit Tactical Tech, which is who are experts on security, safety, and how to behave simply in sensitive landscapes. Another example of collaborations with on-the-ground organizations could be this one we did this spring for connected development in Nigeria, who had about 200 observers in the various parts of Nigeria during the elections. The situation here was similar to the one in Kenya in that they expected a lot of violence to happen on election day. So they have this platform, they had their situation, and that was very peculiar. In their situation room, they actually invited the the national security officers who were watching online as the reports from their 200 observers out in the landscapes and a handful of social media observers as these messages came in and became categorized. Surprising, because you don't think that a grassroots organization would collaborate with the police in a country like Nigeria, but they did. And what happened is that when the on-the-ground reporters sent messages on tendency for violence, they could also respond by sending security forces. The elections was the most peaceful in a very long time in Nigeria. Christoph Billen, he is an analyst at the ICC in Hague. He promotes also a new set of thinking into these crowdsourced space where you are able to have a dialogue back with the ones giving you information. And I think you in the rescue situation know the importance of being able to ask additional questions, being able to specify the piece of information that is transmitted. And his project, People's Intelligence, propose a safe way, cell phone-based way of being able to do this in restricted areas in the world. So, close to the end, one of the things I quite often mention is that we live, I think, now in an age where we are surrounded by all these new tools, where it is extremely difficult to understand the full effect and the full potential also in these things. And sometimes you can observe a phenomenon and it turns out it is actually not what you observed. Turns out it was something else that happened. And we are digitizing the world as never before. We are connected to it. We use the information there and we interact with it. And by developing an intelligence skill set in doing so, we have never had possibilities similarly as what we have today. When language barriers starts to fall, there is an enormous amount of knowledge, culture, and interesting thoughts available out there. And reflecting on these phenomena that we see online and thinking about them, I find it at least very useful to try to find parallel situations in history or in real life that can help me understand what happens right now. Because if you only look at what happens, I think it is very quickly to come to wrong conclusions. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Per, for these interesting insights into the history of digital volunteerism and also what you do actually in the task force, but also the power of networks you mentioned and how these can change the political landscape or provided very valuable insights. So we have now time for some questions. Are there any questions?
Or comments.
Or just comments, yeah, also. So maybe I start with a brief question. When you work in these volunteer communities and you and provide a lot of digital data, you mentioned that the quality of the data and the verification of the data is somewhat critical. So by what means do you really validate or to have this quality control installed? Are there specific ways to do that, or because I think that might be at least a burden for the link to the responders? They say, okay, this is digitally volunteered information, it's crowdsourced, we don't know whether we can trust the information, and how do you address this issue?
I can give a couple of examples. The first one maybe from my study of the crowdsourcing monitoring of the Kenyan elections. The formal organizations doing that are organizations like the Carter Center. There are international teams sent out to observe elections. So they have all these systematic forms of registering what happens. My job was to compare their results with the information collected from two groups. One group was trained civic society observers, where they had 2,000 of them spread out all over Kenya during the elections, and the rest were ordinary civilians who could report via SMS. So what I discovered was that no, the civil society are not technical experts on elections. So they didn't comment too much on the formal stuff, but they comment on everything that prevented them from entering the voting facility, cast their vote, and go home in peace. They also commented on attempts to bribe. So ordinary people are very occupied with justice. Things has to be right, happen correctly. Whereas the Carter Center didn't mention the word bribing with one sentence. Still, our perception is that the formal organization has the most correct version. So what I'm saying is that sometimes you can challenge what is the correct perception of a situation. But when it comes to qualifying crowdsourced data, we have various methods where triangulation, that you can verify the same piece of information from different sources, is a common used method. If it is a question of evaluating or classifying information, we usually use that between 3 and 5 volunteers have had to conclude the same thing. So if one people say this image is relevant and 3 people say it's not relevant, then it's not relevant. So yeah, various methods used for different purposes.
Okay, thank you. We also opened the floor for the internet audience. Do we have any questions from there? Not now? Okay. So maybe let's then conclude a little bit. One thing I really would like to mention, that all of you can actually volunteer. We here at Wuppertal University have also a volunteer group, and we help to the standby task force on a case-by-case basis when it's activated. We have then sessions in the lecture halls or wherever, and come together. So if you are interested in contributing to that, just follow our website, and when something serious is going on in the world, you might see a link and get invited to that. And if you are maybe from the internet, you just go to the standby task force and see what's going on and get involved in this group. I think it's the best way of seeing how these things work, that you actually can make a difference even if you are not really in the field, and you can even make a difference from home and work together with people with the same attitude and with the same goal. So by that, I would like to thank you again for giving this interesting talk. And in 2 weeks, we will have Albrecht Prömme here, the president of the Technical Aid Agency, and he will talk about the international aspects of the Technical Aid Agency and what they do abroad in the different areas of the world. And I hope to see you there again. Thank you.